Okay, we're going to get started. So thank you for coming. Thank you for staying, girls. Despite the weather outside, it's nice to have Dale here with us today. So we're going to get started with the land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of Yaknik, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of the province. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Courtney Crocker, and I'm the Education Librarian here with the Faculty of Education. Today we are delighted to have our author, storyteller, and folklorist Dale Jarvis join us. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
So today we are launching our first of our series, Tales to Teach, Tales to Reach, a series highlighting writers, illustrators, and storytellers in Newfoundland and Labrador. So this event today is made possible by the Office of Public Engagement and the Accelerator Fund. So Memorial University's Public Engagement Accelerator Fund is intended to help meet the goals and objectives of Memorial's public engagement framework by increasing capacity of our faculty, students, and staff to collaborate with partners outside the university. So there's really three goals of this author series. So number one is to highlight the rich collection of books here at the Education Library. So please feel free to have a look around. I know some of you are already familiar with what we have here, but please have a look. Connect students, faculty, and schools and the public with each other to writers, illustrators, and storytellers, and to empower our pre-service teachers to think about incorporating Newfoundland and Labrador authors, illustrators, and storytellers. And for just a couple housekeeping items before I hand it over to Dale. So we are live streaming on Facebook, thanks to Morris. And that will be available on our YouTube channel, our TLC YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And we also have our friends from the QE2 Makerspace over here. So they're doing some 3D printing adorable little ghosts and some buttons. So feel free to go over and get familiar with those things over there. And lastly, we are entering, you can enter your name to win this book, signed by Dale today. And I'm trying to remember anything else. We do have some refreshments for at the end. So yeah, I guess I'll just hand it over to Dale.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Where to start? So maybe just a little bit of an introduction to who I am and
yes, I do have that here.
the various things that I do. I wear a couple different hats. I am adjunct faculty here in the Department of Folklore. I sometimes teach the public folklore graduate course. And I have worked for a long time for Heritage NL, which is the organization in the province that deals with both heritage buildings and intangible cultural heritage. So all our ways of knowing things and craft skills, all those kinds of things. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work on craft at risk in the province. It's been sort of a focus over the last couple of years. But then by night, I also tell stories with the St. John's Haunted Hike. And I have a long interest in ghost stories and storytelling. I'm one of the founding members of the St. John's Storytelling Festival. And I guess I've always just been interested in creepy stories. Like I was the kid that went to the library, and signed out all the Alfred Hitchcock Presents and like all the creepy stories that I could when I was a little kid. And then have turned into that person that now is collecting and writing those stories. Yeah.
Tell me my TikTok too, I just discovered.
Oh, somebody follows me on TikTok. Excellent. Yeah, so like I'm always interested in kind of new ways to tell stories, and I think one of the things that I hear very often is that people are worried about, oh, storytelling is dying. People don't tell stories anymore, and I don't think that's true. I think people are incredibly hungry for stories, and the incredible, I don't know, proliferation of storytelling online. With things like, everyone who has a YouTube channel now, all the people who are telling stories on TikTok, the huge explosion of interest, reinvigoration of role-playing games, and that kind of world exploration. Like I think people are really, really hungry for telling and listening to stories. So I'm always interested in, like how do I reach a new audience? And I might not be the typical TikTok user, but what has been really interesting is that when I post stories, there's a whole new audience of people who maybe haven't heard me tell these stories before. And one of the things that I find quite often is if I post a lot of Newfoundland and Labrador content, and people will message or make a comment and say, oh, like I'm from Glovertown. Like, do you know a story about red eyes in Glovertown? Or I'm from Deer Lake. Do you know a story about the guy that's trapped in the dam in Deer Lake? Or tell me about the Weber or whatever it happens to be. Or people will just say, I'm from such and such a community. Do you know a ghost story from there? And because I've been doing this for a long time now, chances are I might know a story and just be able to share those. That might be in a book or might be something that I've written for a more academic sort of audience, than to be able to just take that and tell a 30-second story that a whole new generation and group of people get to experience is amazing. Yeah, there's always new ways to tell stories, and I'm always interested in that.
I love that.
Yeah.
So can you tell everyone how you got started with collecting ghost stories?
Yeah. I've always had an interest, I guess, in stories and storytelling. And in my academic life, I was always really interested in stories about places. And I have a real love of historic buildings. When you explore heritage buildings a lot, invariably someone is going to tell you a ghost story about a building. So I had actually gone on, I was on a trip in the UK, and a friend of mine said, hey, we should go on this ghost tour that exists in the city of York. Which is an amazing kind of medieval city. And the tour started at York Minster Cathedral, the big church, and it kind of made its way through the medieval streets of York, told great stories. And I came back to St. John's thinking this would be perfect in St. John's. And because I have an interest in research, I kind of had this, I won't say unique, but a well-suited set of skills in that I was interested in storytelling. I could do some research. I liked writing. So I was able to pull enough stories together to start the St. John's Haunted Hike. And so I maybe had a dozen stories or so to start off with. And I never thought it would kind of turn into my business or an ongoing project, but it did. And the more I did, the more people would come up to me and say, "Oh, you're the ghost guy. Like, tell me and then tell me a story." And it still happens. Like I'll get in a cab, and the cabbie will look in the mirror and go, "Oh, are you the guy that does the ghost stories?" And then will proceed to tell me some incredible story about somewhere haunted that they lived in St. John's. So the collection work that I do, often I will find, I'm interested in historical stories. So I pour through, MUN's Digital Archives Initiative is an amazing thing now where you can search through all the scanned newspapers. It's an amazing thing for research. So I find historical stories that way. But then I also get people telling me stories. People will email me their own stories or share a story on TikTok or whatever it happens to be. And then quite often, like for the book projects, I'll take those stories that people tell me and then often research the backstory of those places. So my most recent book, Haunted Houses of Newfoundland and Labrador, that was a lot of that. Like people would tell me kind of the kernel of a story, or I would find a small version of a story somewhere, and then I would go and dig out the historical bits and pieces to kind of fill out that story a bit. Yeah.
So I guess it's probably unfair to ask if you have a favorite.
A favorite? Yeah, it is really unfair to ask, but
so many.
there are so many. I think one of the ones from this book that I really loved kind of digging into. There's a spot in St. John's, and there was a story that was really well known. It was a really famous St. John's story up until about the 1920s, 1940s. And then after that, it kind of disappeared from memory. And most people today don't even know the place that the story is about. So there was a spot called Bennett's Grove, which was on kind of the south shore of Kitty Vitty Lake. There was a spot there that had, the rumor was that a pirate treasure was buried in this particular spot along the shores of Kitty Vitty Lake. And from the late 1800s up into about the 1920s, there was this craze that people would go and dig for treasure. And it would kind of enter these little periods where there would be a flurry of activity, and all kinds of people would descend upon this area and try to dig up this pirate treasure, which was protected by a number of local spirits. And really interesting little sub-stories about a woman who lived in the area who claimed to have a psychic cat that would bring this ghost into her house, and the ghost would tell her where the treasure was hidden. And there really was, and I use the word craze because there really was this period of time where there were crowds of people that would go down and peer into these holes that people had dug in that part of St. John's. And for decades afterwards, older people would remember, you're as likely to win the lottery as you are to find the treasure in Bennett's Grove, sort of thing. So it almost became a local legend into itself. And as a storyteller, I'm really fascinated by that, in that how something could be so popular and was in the newspaper, multiple times, was written about in different places, and then kind of completely fade from our memory. And today, Bennett's Grove isn't even a place that people think of or know of anymore. Along Forest Road, and we don't even think of the name Forest Road. There was a forest and there was a road that went through it, and now you drive along Forest Road and you don't think that you're in the middle of a forest, but there really was. And there was this small laneway that would have led from, I guess, Kingsbridge Road down to the Gut in Kitty Vitty. And I guess at a time when there wasn't electric light, that would have been like way out in the country, like going through the woods to go to Kitty Vitty. I can imagine all these kind of creepy stories growing up about that space and that kind of place that would have been kind of outside of St. John's, that had this kind of sinister reputation. And today we drive past, the Pen and the Old General, and we don't think of it as being a particularly spooky spot. Maybe parts of it are still spooky, but it has certainly changed in recent decades. Yeah.
Okay, so outside of St. John's, can you tell us some of your favorite stories that you've collected?
Yeah, one of the other ones, just talking about the research kind of piece. One of the stories at the beginning of the book is about Mock Beggar. And if anyone is from kind of Bonavista area, they'll know about Mock Beggar. It's this very historic part of Bonavista. There is a provincial historic site there. There's a big red shed, huge big red building, one of the oldest in the province, and the old Bradley property is there. And many people, including members of the Bradley family, have told me stories about how that place is haunted. That area is very boggy. It's a bit of a marsh, and there is a pond there. And during kind of the early 20th century, they dug a canal from the ocean into this pond so fishermen could take their boats in. And while they were excavating this canal, they found a number of coffins with bodies in them in an area that wasn't marked as a cemetery. These were very old coffins and bodies that they found. And even some of the clothing was still intact on some of these bodies. And people said it almost looked like kind of Puritan clothing, so like stuff from the 16 or 1700s. And other people had stories in the area about digging house, putting their posts down to put their houses on, and coming across bodies. So that whole area has this really fascinating history that merges really nicely with the ghost stories for the area too. And again, I think some people of this generation-ish might know some of the ghost stories because they've been on local kind of paranormal investigation shows and things like that, but they might not know the deeper history about all these interesting burials that were in the site as well. So when I can, again, kind of bring the current stories and tie it to the historical stories, I love that as a researcher and as a storyteller.
Yeah, I love that. So we do have a couple of your other books here as well. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, so I started off writing ghost stories, but I have a real interest in Newfoundland culture and history in general. So one of the books you have here is Any Mummers Allowed In, which is kind of an exploration of Christmas folklore in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I think I've been involved since the very early days with the Mummers Festival. It's kind of a pet project, passion of mine.
You have many projects.
Yeah, I've always got another project. And again, I think mummering is one of those things, and certainly we found this with the Mummers Festival, is that people have an idea of what mummering is, and assume that everyone has the same idea that they have about what mummering is. But when you travel across the province, it's actually very, very different, depending on where you are and what generation you're from. And so a lot of what we think of today as mummering is really stuff that comes from the 1980s, like the famous Land and Sea video about it, the Mummers song that came out around the same time in the 80s. But mummering actually existed in a really fascinating variety of forms. And so the book kind of goes into that and explores some of those other aspects of mummering that we might not know as much about, and how mummering kind of ebbs and flows and is popular and then kind of dies out a little bit and then is reinvented. So yeah, that was a really fun one to research as well. And that one has a ton of photographs of the tradition from all over the province. And I'm just interested in other things. Like I did a book fairly recently on place names of Newfoundland and Labrador. Again, that love of stories and places. So really fascinated in seeing how names evolve in Newfoundland and where our names come from or get lost and changed along the way. So yeah, I'm always looking for kind of history, but the quirky side of history is always what I'm most interested in. Those little weird, strange bits of history.
Okay. I don't know if we have any questions from our students. Yeah, Leslie.
Just one. I'm wondering if there's any juicy bits around the university.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah.
What do you think the QE2 must be?
So there is a whole chapter in here on kind of university legends. And some of the legends about the QE2 library, like the fact that it's built backwards, which isn't true.
I have heard that, yes.
And or there's a legend that it is slowly sinking under the weight of the books, also not true. And a story that gets told about libraries all over the place. But there are a few specific legends for the library here. There is supposed to be a ghost of a woman that haunts one of the public bathrooms. I see people nodding. Have you heard this about the ghost of a woman? Have you experienced the ghost of the woman? But people have said, people have been in a stall in the washroom, and I've heard like the sink turn on, someone washing their hands, and then they've come out of the stall and there not be anyone there, or have felt, or I've kind of felt like someone behind them, or heard footsteps. There's a story about a cleaner who turned around at one point and saw a woman there and was quite startled because it was after hours, and said, "Oh, can I help you find your way out?" And then the woman was gone. Have you heard some of these stories? Yeah, we'll chat afterwards about these. Yeah, but yeah, so there very clearly are some stories about that building. And my friends in the folklore archive here, the vault for the folklore archive, I think, is on this floor, maybe, or is it on the first floor? No, the main collection is up there, but there is a vault with the rolling shelves, right?
Yeah.
And there's a story about, there was a grad student who on her first day working, and they sent her down to the vaults to get something, and she was in the vault by herself, and she heard this kind of clacking of heels, like of shoes, across the floor, and when she turned around, there was, of course, nobody there. And so she packed up the file she was working on and left, and never, ever went back to the vault again. Yeah. And libraries are the Arts and Culture Center basement, another haunted library. Yeah, there's supposed to be the ghost of a nun there, or a sister.
Supposed to be a ghost of the second.
Of Education Building?
No,
Arts and Culture Center.
Yeah.
And the Arts and Culture Center, like before the Arts and Culture Center was built, it was actually a Church of England orphanage on that spot. And this is a little interesting geographical sort of tidbit. You know where the box office entrance is to the Arts and Culture Center? You go through that little tunnel. When you come out of that little archway, off to the left there are a row of trees, 2 rows of trees that parallel kind of each other, that go down towards where I guess the daycare is. And that is the original laneway that would have led up to the orphanage. And people have claimed to have heard like the sound of children talking and running, like inside the building and along that laneway that's still there. So yeah, there's these little kind of places on our landscape that we kind of forget have a history, and we drive past them every day, but yeah, definitely have stories that are still attached to them. Stories about the daycare as well. Okay, yeah. And stories about people drowning in Burton's Pond, and that might be true or might not be true. Universities tend to acquire a lot of urban legends as well as kind of true, what I call true haunting stories. So some, and again, like I often will hear stories, and with my folklorist brain will kind of go, oh, okay, that's a legend, and I've heard versions of that in other places. But lots of people have had very personal experiences here at the university as well. Yeah. Do I believe in ghosts? It's funny. I gave a talk the other day for Maria Lesiv's supernatural course, undergrad supernatural course, and they asked me the same question, like, do I believe in ghosts? And I actually am somewhat of a skeptic, and I think in part because I hear so many stories, and because my background's in folklore and that kind of research, and so often I will hear stories and I'll go, okay, well, that's actually a version of a legend from this other place. But I do hear a lot of strange stories. What I love is when different people independently of one another tell me stories about the same place. So stories like about the library and different people telling me about experiences that they have had. Those kinds of things make me wonder kind of what's behind it. And I only half jokingly say that I live in a haunted house. And I have never outright seen a ghost. But we, again, half jokingly say that we have a ghost cat that lives in our house. Anyone who has a cat knows what knows what it feels like when a cat kind of brushes up against your leg. I have felt that, thinking it was one of my cats and looking down and the cat not being there. Or seeing a black cat out of the corner of my eye and turning and there not being a cat there. And none of our cats are black cats. So I am open to the possibility of strange things. But I do kind of sit on the fence a little bit. Yeah.
Can you speak to the intersection of religion with ghosts and believing of other willingness? Like, in a general sense, I feel like someone has a strong faith in heaven and the afterlife and all that sort of stuff, and they're more open to the concept that, oh yeah, ghosts are a very real thing.
Yeah.
But I consider myself to be somewhat of an agnostic. I'd be open to believing it. Like, I have felt presence at times in old places. I lived in a really old house on Pennywell Road, and I remember having instances, I don't know if I was just more young and naive, but where, the whole religion thing intersects. So, if you have strong religion, faith, you might be more inclined.
I love a good creepy ghost story, but by far the most common type of story that I hear, especially in Newfoundland and Labrador, are what we might call token stories. And that's where someone gets a sign that someone close to them has recently died, or they will have, at the moment of someone's death, they will have an interaction with the spirit of that person. And in most instances, those are positive sort of experiences. And I think a lot of people who are of faith, who are religious and who believe in an immortal soul, I think those kinds of experiences are very comforting in a way. I've heard lots of stories about people who are close to death, having experiences with seeing a loved one, or having my Aunt Betty, who passed away a number of years ago. She talked about, at one point, her family talks about her seeing what she called her heavenly representative, like basically an angel that had come before her death. So I think, these things happen. And I think a lot of people who do come from a religious background have no problem kind of having both experiences, like having a religious kind of faith, but then also having a faith in other things. And of course, religion is kind of a mystical thing, and a lot of, especially in a lot of our kind of Roman Catholic communities, there really was a belief in the power of things like holy water and invocations to saints. I have friends in, this is the 21st century, who, when they want to sell their house, still have their little statue of Saint Joseph that they bury outside the step. That people still have faith in those kind of folk aspects of religion.
And all the superstitions that come.
All the superstitions that come with it. Yeah.
About eating meat on Friday. And,
Yep.
what it means and like just really bizarre sorts of.
It is interesting. In some, there are certain places in the province that certainly have a lot of stories, and there are some places where there seem to be fewer ghost stories. And that isn't to say they don't have them, but certainly in some sort of more Methodist, very serious Methodist communities, United communities, they're not as big on ghosts. And in certain places, like in really Roman Catholic communities, in French communities, like on the Port-au-Port, like there's lots of stories about people meeting the devil, like the devil showing up at a dance and a woman being asked to dance and then looking down and seeing that her partner has cloven hooves instead of feet. So I think there is a bit of an overlap in some ways, but it's hard to say, one religious group has more ghost stories than another. I think a lot of it is less church based and more family folklore based. Like I think people in families seem to, they're the ones that are sharing a lot of these stories. And I think that crosses religious lines. I think some families just like those kinds of stories or have someone in their family who they think might be more sensitive to those things and then more likely to pass those stories along.
Thank you. I think you had a question.
So of all the places you find yourself, whether it's something like this or a classroom or just with friends or on the hunt and hike, is there one story you look forward to telling?
One story I look forward to telling. I mean, I love a good jump scare. Like and there's like one on the haunted hike that I always look forward to that I know that there's some kid that I'm gonna freak out. I love that. I do like that. Even though I think I'm known for telling ghost stories, the stories I love to tell are fairy stories in Newfoundland and Labrador, because the fairies are generally not very nice. And ghosts are kind of predictable. Like ghosts always kind of do the same thing over and over. Like, oh, I've come back to warn you, or I'm guarding a treasure, or, it's the anniversary of my death and I'm going to appear again. But fairies are very different and very unpredictable and way creepier than ghosts in some ways. And I think that unpredictability is part of it. You never know quite what's going to happen when people interact with the fairies. So when I get opportunities to share those stories, as a storyteller as well, I tell a lot of Newfoundland-based material, but I also love folktale. I love being able to tell those long, old-fashioned folk tales. And there aren't a lot of opportunities to do that. I think one of my favorite stories to tell, especially in high schools, is Aschenputtel, which is the Brothers Grimm version of Cinderella. And I love doing it with high school students because they think they know the story. And it gets way more gruesome than they ever remember at a certain point. And so all these teenagers who are kind of too cool to listen to fairy tales get sucked right in by these horrible things. And it's not the story that they remember, watching on TV or whatever. So yeah, those are some of my favorite stories. Some of my favorite stories to tell, the fairy stories, and some of those old, long fairy tales that we just don't have opportunity to listen to anymore.
Well, my nan used to say that. Put bread in your pockets, the fairies are going to get you.
Yep.
All of that. And I was like, fairies? Fairies are nice. Like, I was
No.
an infant brownies. Like,
I did a storytelling program last year with the Munn Botanical Gardens,
Right.
and we were telling fairy stories. And at the beginning of the walk, we had like a basket of hard bread, right? And we invited everyone to just take a little piece and put it in your pockets. And then when we started, I would always say, do you have your bread in your pockets? And all the Newfoundlanders would say, oh yeah, we got our bread in our pockets. And one night, there was a woman who happened to be from Saskatchewan. I said, does everyone have their bread in their pockets? And the woman said, oh, I ate my bread. And I didn't have to say anything. All the Newfoundlanders in the crowd went, ooh. Like, that is not good, right? And she had no idea what she had done wrong. All the Newfoundlanders knew, like, oh, you don't dare mess with the fairies without bread in your pockets. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah.
If you watch horror movies, what kind of horror movie do you think you will survive from?
Oh my Lord. Here's a funny thing about me. Again, because I tell ghost stories, people assume I like horror movies. I am the biggest baby, like when it comes to horror movies. Anything like gory or anything, like I can't watch it. And I'm always the person in the movie theater that jumps. Like I am always the one that screams at the at the moment. Even though I know it's coming, I have a total fear of zombies. I would not survive a zombie apocalypse, I don't think. What I would survive? I don't know. I think if there was a good kind of old fashioned like ghost story haunting kind of thing, I think that would be the one I would survive, because I don't think it would creep me out as much, and I would and ghosts again, like they always have a reason for doing what they want to do. So I think that's what I would survive. Zombies, absolutely not.
Unpredictable.
My brain would be eaten. Yeah.
But it's becoming like this show Ghosts. I've never seen it, but it looks really funny when I see bits and pieces of it.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of becoming popular.
Yeah, and so this is the show
Yeah.
which there's a North American remake of a British
Yeah, it's a
version
British.
about a couple that purchase a house, and it comes with all the ghosts, and she can see everything that happens. It is very funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. Like they're really, and I don't think it's new. Like I think every few years there's another TV show or movie series that comes out that kind of reintroduces the next group of young watchers. Like Supernatural, I think, like when Supernatural or Grimm came out, like that introduced a whole new generation of people to those kind of folkloric tropes, I guess.
Yeah.
And before that it was Buffy and all those other shows. So I think every decade or so there's another show that kind of brings up these supernatural themes and introduces another generation of creepy little kids like me who's going to grow up and love to read and tell these stories. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to ask one last question. You kind of already talked about this a little bit, but for our pre-service teachers, how can they tie in some of the local history or sort of ghost stories into the classroom? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think storytelling itself is a really important skill for kids to learn. And a number of years ago, for several years, I did an Art Smarts project with a fellow storyteller, Mary Farron. And we would go into schools and teach kids how to tell stories. And I don't expect every kid to become a storyteller, but at some point, all of those kids are going to have to do a job interview. They're going to have to stand up and give a talk at someone's wedding or whatever it happens to be. And so giving people the confidence to stand up and tell stories, I think is really, really important. The number one fear in North America isn't zombies, it's public speaking. Right? So anything we can do to kind of, even among teachers, I know teachers are terrified about standing up and telling stories, and I think that's a really interesting skill to learn, both as an educator and as a student. One of the things that I do often is teach people in kind of the heritage sector how to tell stories better. And I always say, people will listen to information for a very short period of time, like dates and numbers and figures. Like people will only listen for a few minutes. But if you tell a story, they'll listen for 10, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to a story that they wouldn't listen to information. So it's a great way of kind of lengthening people's attention span. I think there are lots of places in the curriculum, like when we look at those curriculum outcomes, where we can kind of inject Newfoundland material and Newfoundland stories. And that could be anything from, in art classes, creating art that's based on Newfoundland themes, or in social studies programs, looking at things. The Heritage Fairs program is amazing. And I've been a judge several times for the Heritage Fairs program. It's always amazing to see what these kids can come up with. I also think that there are so many passionate volunteers in this province who are passionate about our history and culture. And it's a really great resource for teachers and administrators to be able to call upon. Like if you are a teacher and you don't know how to incorporate Newfoundland folklore into your curriculum, reach out to someone like me, or reach out to Historic Sites Association, or reach out to the Department of Folklore or the Storytelling Festival. Like there's lots of ways to do it. And even if you as a teacher aren't certain how to do it, some of us have been doing it for a while and might have some ideas or easy ways to do it. I was talking about the Mummers Festival. One of the things that we did with the Mummers Festival one year was actually teach a workshop for teachers on how to make hobby horses, which were a part of mummering traditions in some communities. And then those teachers could go back into their classrooms and teach their kids how to make that. There's an art teacher in Corner Brook that we've worked with who teaches spruce root basket making to her students, which is kind of a Mi'kmaq traditional craft. She did a project with her students one year about making Riglan fences, which are those kind of woven traditional Newfoundland fences, in an art class, but again, kind of thinking about Newfoundland heritage. So there's lots of ways to do it, and lots of people who are willing to help.
And you have great resources on your website and stuff.
I do, yeah,
You do.
yeah.
Okay, so we will wrap it up. So thank you everyone for coming. I'll leave some time for everyone to talk to Dale. He's a great wealth of information and stories. So please help yourself. And my last slide just has my email address. So if you are here, I would love for you to email and give some feedback. But Susan, you have something to say? Nope, no, you don't. No, okay. This is my email address. So for the folks that were here, feel free to email me some feedback. I'd love to hear it.
And we could share Dale's information on the Facebook page.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, we will do that.
I'm easy to find.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Dale Gilbert Jarvis on TikTok.
Yes. A lot of them are following. A lot of them are following already. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I highly, highly recommend the haunted light.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on the haunted hikes all the way up here, but
That's okay.
yeah.
But this haunted I went to was another guy.
I'm too afraid to go. I mentioned to my husband, he's like, "You'd be so spooked out." I'm like, "I would. I'd be the one